You're listening to a download from the outdoorstation.co.uk. Number 558.
Hello and welcome back once again to the Outdoor Station for another podcast, interview and video. A few weeks back in podcast number 554, I interviewed Mark Waring, which was the introduction to packrafting, part 1 if you like, and today we're going to be doing part 2. Now, if you haven't listened to part 1, I suggest you do so beforehand because it covers all the safety aspects and the practical aspects of how to get into packrafting and where to get advice, and obviously take it slowly and carefully because like any other sport, especially involving wild water, it can be dangerous. So we'll be coming on to part 2 shortly, but first I just wanted to say a few thank yous. Now, a few weeks back, I also mentioned if you could give a review on the iTunes library, which is a fairly simple thing to do. You just find it on iTunes, find us on iTunes, and it says write a review. I would be very grateful as it keeps us up the outdoors and sports listing. And I just wanted to say thanks to a few people that did that, all of whom said very nice things. Mac D, 100 Rich, TR007 and Kaskar, I think is your name. And you were very kind and greatly appreciated. So if you wouldn't mind doing a review on iTunes, that would be lovely. Thanks. It does, as I say, help us be found a bit easier. Now, another thank you I'd like to do is over on the outdoorstation.co.uk. We have the facility down the right-hand side here near the bottom where my mouse is. If you wish to make a small financial donation to help us with the ever-increasing expenses, unfortunately, which are happening to us all, via Ko-fi, Patreon or PayPal, you can do so there. And once again, I would just want to say thanks to 3 people, Colin Wilford, David Brogan, and an anonymous person that made a donation through Ko-fi, which you can do, of course, with any of these things. As I say, greatly appreciated. Thanks very much. It does help the wheels of running this sort of thing go round. So that's good. So thanks very much, everyone. Greatly appreciated. And if you can add a review, as I say, I'd be very happy for you to do so. Right, so let's get back to the interview. Now, as I said, Mark is an experienced pack rafter, but he's taken his time getting that experience. And this particular interview covers Mark's, David Lintern and Debra West on their 140-kilometre journey down the River Kaitum in the Swedish Lapland. Now, that involved a 2-day hike in and an 8-day paddle. So there's a lot that we cover in this. Some detail, if you want to know more about the Kaitum, will of course be in the show notes for the video and the podcast, etc. But if you have any questions, I'm sure any of them would be happy to answer your queries regarding the content. So without further ado, here's my conversation this evening with Mark, David and Debra. Well, guys, thank you very much indeed for joining me tonight. It's going to be a fascinating conversation and a very interesting one. This is definitely part 2 of the packrafting conversations. And tonight we have, obviously, Mark, David and Debra. So good evening, guys.
Hi, good evening.
Mark, I think I'm going to start with you initially because obviously it's a natural way to take it forward from the previous conversation. You did touch on this in passing as we finished the last conversation, but certainly this was a trip that I wanted to hear more about, and I know you wanted to share with viewers and listeners as well. So do tell us how the Kaitum trip all started, how it all came together fairly briefly, if you would.
Okay, there's sort of 2 parts to that answer, almost. The first part is I actually did this River Kaitum trip myself in 2018 now, and was so impressed with it that I swore to myself at the end that I would repeat it one day. The second part to the answer is that I met David and Debra on a TGO magazine packrafting testing weekend. Basically, David and I did a feature in the Scottish Highlands now over 3 years ago in that winter just before the pandemic. And one thing I successfully managed to do that weekend clearly was to plant the seed in David and Debra's mind about joining me on a rerun of the Kaitum River. And again, that pandemic year, we were talking about doing it in the summer of 2020, and for obvious reasons that didn't happen. But we kept the embers of that idea alive between us, so over that long period of isolation and restriction on travel. And then we started to talk about it seriously again in January of last year, so in January of 2022. And I think what possibly, though they can answer for themselves, what both of them were interested in was something which is a step up from Scotland. So you've got a wilder river system, you've got a wilder landscape, but equally what the Kaitum can provide as well is it's got an internationally renowned trail that you can use to access it. So no expensive flying or anything like that. And also a real bonus to the River Kaitum is the fact that it's got a river map as well. So it's got a huge advantage that generally what's coming ahead of you, and you can plan accordingly. So when we got back from the Scottish Highlands, and in the course of writing up that TGO article, I sent out a copy of that river map that you've got up there, Bob, which can be found on a link that you'll put on the program notes. With that in front of them, I think really embedded the idea of a good testing pack rafting trip of around about 10 days, which has got all the core elements of what pack rafting is about. So you've got a hike in through spectacular mountainous landscape, and then you've got a good 8 days on a wild river system, which you can see there from the Google Earth pictures that you've got up there. And you've got some superlative scenery as you drift through high mountain lakes. On the picture in front of us, we can see the start of it, and then pick up a river system which has got all the full gamut of rapids, from easygoing class 1s up to frightening class 6s. But for us sort of intermediate pack rafters, there was plenty of there to test us and to challenge us.
That's a great introduction. Thank you very much indeed for making that clear, Mark. I was trying to just pad out the background information there as you were talking. So that sounds like a real challenge for you all, really. But as you say, you're sort of semi-familiar. You've been there before, so you've got a bit more of an idea of what to expect. Because I should imagine coming into that sort of area for the first time would be quite unnerving for most people. How did it actually sort of compare to Scotland as a landscape, really?
Possibly that's a question better addressed by David and Debra, who are both resident in Scotland. I mean, to me, Northern Scandinavia is it's a very familiar place. I married a Swede, so I've been knocking around there for 20 years. I guess it's a step up. It's up another level. So I think David described the mountains at around about 50% bigger than the Scottish Highlands. The lakes are bigger. The rivers are bigger. That said, it's a level down beyond places like Alaska and the Yukon Territory. So it's a good place to test yourself and to stretch and challenge yourself. But equally, you're not quite in a landscape that's going to present the range of difficulty such as Alaska or the Yukon Territory. But yeah, northern Sweden, Norway, Finland, beautiful places and some really superlative scenery, which is on our doorstep almost in the UK.
Well, gorgeous. I think you said that the access to your endpoint was fairly well trodden because there's it's either on or just off the Kungsleden Trail. Is that correct?
That's exactly it, Bob. So the Kungsleden, which is around about a 450 kilometre trail, which runs through Swedish Lapland from Hemavan down in the south up to Abisko in the north. The sort of northern section of it is the most popular, which basically runs to from Arbisco and down to Nicolocta. And what we were able to do is to access that trail from where a daily running bus, which runs from the town of Kiruna, where you can fly to. It's about a 45-minute bus ride to the trailheads that will get you via Kebnekaise mountain station to your put-in at Kaitum Yare in around about 2 to 2.5 days. And also what the advantage is, because of the Svenska Turistföreningen, so the STF, which is the trekking organization in Sweden, it's got a network of huts on that northern part of the Kungsleden. So the beauty is that when you get to your put-in at Kaitum Yare, there's a hut there with a small shop. So you've got opportunity to hike relatively light and to stock up when you get to the put-in. And then you're ready to go. But once you're out on the river, that's it. There's nothing there in terms of shops or accommodation or whatever. So it is in essence a wilderness journey from the moment you put in to the moment you get out at the small village of Kaitum, which is around about 100 kilometers downriver. But again, the logistics are good for you because Kaitum has got a small railway station which has got a service back into Kiruna at around about an hour's travel time.
Well, certainly I'd like to take that a stage further, as you say, and ask David what his thoughts were and impressions on the setting foot for the first time into the wilderness of Sweden.
Yeah, it was interesting. I'd been to Sweden before, but I'd not been into the Arctic Circle before, Arctic Lapland. So no, it was interesting. It's not so wildly different. It's sort of, I think I described it to Mark and Debs as sort of strangely familiar. So there's a lot of the flora and fauna. So, for example, when you're walking in, you're kind of a lot of the landscape, the sort of the terrain underfoot was quite similar to the Cairngorm, so it was quite sort of tundra-like. This obviously that shows an area. It was very wet on our first day of walking in. This is a very well trodden bit of the trail which gets you into the Kebnekaise hut, and then around about this point things started to kind of feel a little bit more remote. And so so the mountains are kind of I guess the cliche is that it's Scotland on steroids. So everything is a little bit larger than life or larger scale. But there's a lot of things that are kind of familiar around about it. There's some sort of a remains of a Sami hut there. That's, I guess, a little bit like a shieling in Scotland, perhaps. So there's sort of there's the remains of so the idea of it being a wilderness trip is also quite interesting as well. So it's a long journey without shops, but then there's parts of Scotland that feel quite long and without shops as well. So. And this is a lived-in landscape, so it's the reason it's in such good nick is largely down to the Sami people who've looked after it for obviously millennia, if certainly many generations. So it provokes all these kind of thoughts and I guess comparisons. One of the things when you get a little bit lower down, that you can see in this photo is that obviously things flatten out a little bit, and certainly we're into what's called the boreal now. So which Mark will be able to sort of tell us a bit more about perhaps, but. You're into this amazing kind of alder and birch forest, and it's actually really difficult. The easiest way through is on the river. It's actually quite tricky to walk through some of this, as we discovered a little bit after these photos were taken. And you're into this, the woods and the forest are really, really impressive. And that certainly provoked more comparisons in my mind as to some other areas of Scotland which are less wooded than where, Debra and I live in the Cairngorms. And we're very lucky to live here. But not all parts of Scotland are obviously as well forested as this part of the world. So yeah, it's fascinating place to visit for the first time, and certainly the river itself provided some I guess physical and mental and perhaps even emotional challenges at one or two points in the journey as well. So
And what about yourself, Deborah? Did you have the same sort of emotive feelings when you were walking there for the first time? I take it was your first time in Sweden as well.
Yeah, it was my first time in Sweden. I have been that far north before. I've been up to the Arctic Circle because I've been up to the Lofoten Islands. I did some hiking up that way and did a kayak camping trip as well over a few days. So I was kind of prepared for whatever the weather could throw at us. And I guess living in Scotland, you tend to be able to deal with things like that as well. But very excited to go there and do a longer trip. And great to have Mark there, who obviously knows the country really well, speaks the language too. And, we could, so it was different for me because I usually do things on my own. So it was great to do a trip with a couple other people, a longer trip, and enjoy, the different contributions that everyone makes to the trip. But yeah, really exciting to get there. We sort of brought certain staples with us. We bought some things before we left to do the walk in, and then further things at the lake for the put-in. But yeah, just excited to see the landscape and go somewhere that had more wilderness and, bigger spaces, I guess, between hitting civilized spots again. Yeah.
I know that all three of you are fairly experienced at this packrafting generally and have the safety always at the forefront of your minds. But did you feel there was any more apprehension, shall we say, than you would be in Scotland, particularly as you're with a crew doing it? Were you comfortable from a safety point of view and a sort of solitary point of view more than a personal safety? I'm thinking about the solitude, if nothing else.
I wasn't concerned about the solitude aspect of it, or being far away if someone needed help. I think we would look out for each other, and we talked about the safety gear we had with us. I think we were very well prepared for that. I think for me, as an intermediate pack rafter, it was the unknown of traveling on water, that there was a much higher volume of water than we're used to, I guess, in some of the rivers that we've been out in Scotland. David and I have had a couple of forays now in the Middle Findhorn, and obviously we've got the Spey right near us here as well. But so very different traveling in river systems in particular, where you've got a bigger volume of water to deal with and different river dynamics. Used to the lakes, though. I guess traveling on open lochs, I was quite comfortable, even when we had a couple of days on the bigger lakes where the wind whipped up and we had a lot of strong paddling to do on one afternoon in particular.
Excellent. Grand. Okay, well, I'm going to come back to you then, Mark, if I may. If we can pick us up where you did the put-in. I've got some lovely pictures from Debra, actually, which are show some of the equipment that she packed, obviously, and I guess you're all very similar from that point of view. So if you'd like to talk us through the put-in and the story, and I'll run some of Debra's pictures.
Okay, so the story is, as I've mentioned previously, we had a 2-day or so hike to the start of the Kaitum River journey, so to speak, which is the Svenska Turistföreningen hut at Kaitum Yari, and it was an excellent opportunity just to stock up on additional food. You can see a picture of Debra's gear there. She packs very well, actually. And it was an opportunity then, therefore, to walk in lightly, but to supplement our river trip, which was about to start with additional provisions. And then the Kaitum really, you'll probably find out through the course of this conversation, it's a water journey of various stages. Of course, they all begin at airports, as that picture here shows us. But once you put in the river, once you put in on the big lakes of the Kaitum, you've got several days paddling on flat water, which in a way is quite good, because it just gets you out of the hiking mode and into the water mode, and gives you time to sort of adjust and feel comfortable without any challenging rapids being presented to you. And then after about a day or so to 2 days, depending on the weather conditions, because when you're paddling on flat water, if you've got the wind behind you, you'll literally surf a big lake. If it's in front of you, you're going to have a hell of a time. But the Kaitum River itself starts at the far eastern end of the big lake of Kaitum Yari, and it picks up really through a couple of easy going rapids, so a class 1 and class 2, before you're deposited again into a slightly smaller lake system. So what you've got up there, Bob, you've got the river map, which is available on the link, and it shows you at the top strip. That's the first lake system, so that's Kaitum Yare, which should, depending on the weather, is a day to 2 days travel. And then down, if you look at that top strip again, you'll see at the far right where there's a sort of Roman 2. That's the little portal, which in effect is the start of the Kaitum River and where the rapids start to pick up. So what's great about the Kaitum is it gives you time, it eases you into the journey itself, just gives you time to mentally adjust, to get used to the feeling of water beneath your boat, just to sort of hone your skills a bit before the options or before the challenge of the bigger rapids comes at you in a couple of days' time. And during the course of those first few days on the Kaitum, so through the big lakes, there's some really excellent campsites that were presented to us on the way. It's worth noting that the weather at the beginning was as you can see, sort of mixture of cloud and sun, really quite pleasant. When we put in, it got a little bit colder, and we really only had one very cold day, which was on day 2 really of paddling, and then the weather began to shift upwards a gear, which in a way made being on the river easier because you're less cold. But then, as something that we'll talk about during the course of this conversation, is insect life really started to pick up, and that became the challenge then of being on the river, and particularly in camp as well, which was dealing with hordes of ravenous mosquitoes. But yeah, first few days on the big lakes, if you got clement weather, it's nice and calm. It's almost a paradise, as you can see from the pictures that you're showing now, Bob. It's superlative mountain scenery, spectacular fells around, snow-capped in the early part of summer. So yeah, that was Camp 2 when we put in on the river, and yeah, I think you really appreciate the place that you're in, and what a special place it is. In terms of camp life, yep, you got a honey stove there, so it gives you an opportunity to use and utilize a cooking system like that, because there's plenty of birchwood on the Kaitum, so that's one way that you can really knock down the weight of your camping gear. You're not carrying gas canisters or meths, but if you've got the time, yeah, there's plenty of birch twigs around. You can pick it up, feed the honey stove, and just really lighten the load, but also get a brew in as well whilst enjoying the smell of birch smoke.
Well, I'm glad it was some use to you, particularly with the mozzies. Debra, I think you wanted to sort of talk about the impression the lake's made on you. So would you like to pick the conversation up there?
Yeah, sure. As Mark mentioned, we got to the put in there. We'd stocked up on some more supplies at the STF hut. And then it was great just to get those heavy packs off. Of course, you're carrying around 20 kilos or so. The boys probably more than me as well, with all your pack raft gear and some staple food that we brought with us that we knew we wanted, because you're not always guaranteed what's in the shops there, but in the STF hut before you put in, and just topping up on a bit of fuel and things there too. So great, yeah, just getting the boats packed and getting set off on the lake on that first day. So it was a bit cool and overcast, but then the weather cleared up that first day. It was just lovely. I think having those big, I think, Mark, you described them as cathedral-type mountains, particularly on that first lake, as you're paddling out. I mean, I really enjoy paddling on open water and on coastal areas as well, so I love that feeling of space and, you know, just being in that sort of landscape and those snow-capped mountains Mark was talking about. So, yeah, we got lucky, I think, the first couple of days down the lakes, but we did have one afternoon where the weather did pick up. And, yeah, we had a good battle, I think, for a few hours to get up to, actually, that was to get to the start of where the river starts flowing. So our first couple of camps on the lakes too were great. There were some mosquitoes around even on the first camp, I must say, but they were kind of big and sluggish. And I think because it was still cold that night, they were around, they were coming out, but they weren't being particularly active. And even though they were buzzing around the camp and landing on the shelters, they weren't really biting us then. So I think we were maybe lulled into a false sense of security that it would be okay. Some of the photos you're showing now are further downstream. You know, as we got back, you know, we'd been through a number of rapids areas and further down. And this was our last night's camp on Mosquito Island, as we called it. So even though it was about 30 degrees there, you can see we've got the fire on and, you know, for the smoke, burning some sort of greener stuff to get the smoke going to try and hide it away from the mosquitoes. And we're also, you notice, we're all covered up still wearing the jackets and the gear, and that was purely to stop the mosquitoes biting us. So
pretty vicious insects, certainly.
Yeah.
David, let's come over to you now and tell us your thoughts on the rapids and the sort of camp life generally, how everything sort of started to change when you went from the lakes into the rapids. I've got a couple of video clips of the rapids, I think, here as well, so I'll run those while you're talking, if you like.
So I think as Mark's pointed out, one of the real advantages of excuse me, of the Kaitum is that this is a mapped river, and so we knew that the sort of the quality and the challenge of the river system, the river journey we were on, was going to change, that sort of happened after you sort of exit. Just going to let Mark do his thing there. There we are, Mark. That's Mark just narrowly missing something that could have been a little bit more sketchy than it actually was. Good for him. We knew that because the mapping's so good, we knew that the rapids we knew we were going to enter a sort of a series of rapids. I think it starts really the main announcement is a class 4, which we did walk around. So we had a sort of a section that we were on foot for quite a long time, and at this point the weather was warming up. The mozzies were starting to bite, and it did also feel, I think, perhaps, you know, this is just from my point of view. It'd be worth catching the other views from Debs and Mark as well. But it also felt, I think, that there's a sort of a momentum to a journey, to a river journey, or be it a river or walking journey or whatever. And sometimes it's good to pause, and so that's what we did. I think we all needed a bit of a break, and we stopped at a particular place shortly after that class 4 river that we walked around, and effectively I think probably just needed to down tools and to slow down a little bit, and that was a chance for, as Debra mentioned earlier, to take stock. It meant that we could effectively have a sort of base camp for a day or two, change of perspective, walk up onto the fell, get away from the bugs, but also a chance to start kind of looking at these rapids and breaking the sort of challenge of individual rapids down, and being a bit more systematic about it. it's probably worth saying that in 2020, I had quite a close call on the river. I was with Debra at the time, much to my shame. And we were on the Findhorn, and I think that I know that definitely informed my own sort of subsequent forays back onto the river. It took me a year to get back on the water, and once bitten, twice shy. And definitely going into this, I was aware that needed to do things quite a lot differently. This is the Class 6 that Mark mentioned, I think, earlier on. We didn't run this. I think it's safe to say that this is sort of beyond our sort of remit. It's quite a long rapid. Sort of individual sections of this would probably feel like they would go, but it's quite a lengthy thing. That anyway, so it was a chance really to sort of stop about halfway. What felt like perhaps halfway through the journey, just to sort of stop and take stock. And by doing that, I think you give yourself time to enjoy the challenge that's there, but to do it safely and to do it systematically. And I think that then meant that when we then continued on the journey, after we'd had our walk up onto the fell to kind of take a breather from all those bugs that were starting to bite at that point, it meant that we were then able to sort of break down the rapids that occurred subsequently, and for us all to then sort of enjoy them. And it's not that we ran every single rapid, but we made, I think, perhaps slightly more calculated, informed decisions about the ones that we chose to run and the ones that we chose to move around, portage around. Hopefully that kind of gives a accurate description of what kind of happened in the middle of the trip. I'm sort of very conscious of not just going hell for leather anymore. I'm now older and I don't know about wiser, but certainly I get a lot of pleasure from trying to do things well and not just go at them like a bull in a china shop. So there we are.
The mozzies obviously have been mentioned several times. I'm just trying to find the pictures while you were talking there, and some video clips to show people the joy that they obviously brought to your life. Who would like to detail the thrill and any things that you could actually perhaps should have considered or could have done differently to improve your comfort level?
Yeah, I can give a perspective on it. So I did this trip in 2018 at the same time of year, and the mosquito activity during those first 2 weeks, last weeks of June was minimal, and that sort of makes sense really, because when you're at that latitude, that far north, really you're still in spring. So unlike Scotland, where late June you could expect the midges to be biting hard. You're just coming out of spring in Lapland and above the Arctic Circle. And what happened this year, so in summer of 2022, is they had a very cold winter with a lot of deep snow. And that winter sort of lasted well through May and into early June. So indeed, when we were planning this trip, and we were looking at weather reports, it was looking cold. So temperatures were still below freezing. So there were different factors at play, such as would there be ice on the big lakes? Would we be paddling through the spate, which would be dangerous? Would we have enough warm clothing? And the last thing that I was considering at the bottom of that list was mosquito activity. So during the planning, as we got nearer the trip and we had a Zoom call, I advised David and Debra that I didn't think that mosquitoes were going to be a problem in this period, and so late June, because it was spring, because the weather was looking cold, and they were probably a week or two away. What indeed happened is that was quite literally phenomenal. So when I came back to the UK, I read the Swedish media, and it was being reported that the uptick, the sudden explosion in mosquitoes was exceptional. And how it came about really was that they'd all been tucked up under their snowy blankets, the larvae. And basically, when the hot weather came, which came pretty much during our trip, and certainly within the first few days on the water, the temperatures jumped from around about 12 to 13 degrees up to nudging on 30. So you're suddenly getting this heat on the bogs where they lived, and there was an explosion, and it wasn't just one wave, but there were about 2 to 3 waves suddenly being released at the time. So we're paddling out of the big lakes, so we're dropping in altitude. We're getting into sort of real boreal bush, which is the birch forest, and where there's the bogs and the mires that they hatch from. And yeah, quite literally, they exploded, and just the uptick on a daily basis was incredible till when we got out at the small village of Kaitum. I mean, it was beyond a joke. I mean, it was almost like a horror film. Quite literally, they were crawling all over us. So it was almost becoming problematic. I think my face swelled up as a reaction to the amount of bites that I was getting. We were probably didn't have enough mosquito protection on my advice. Sensibly, Debra ignored me, and she bought some. So we had a small amount of smidge and some small head nets. But there you go. That's Debra's net, which was typical of all of us, really. It just showed the intensity of the bites that we were getting, and it was constant. So part amusing, but part horror show, and also it could have become a medical problem either through allergic reactions, or if you're getting bites, you're tempted to scratch them, you start to infect yourself through dirt, through open wounds. So certainly put an interesting gloss on the trip. It also adds dimension. I think David has used the phrase bug pressure, and it definitely feels like that, because everything that you're doing, from literally the moment you get out of your tent to you getting back into it, then at night you're thinking about the mosquitoes as well as thinking about what you need to do. So yeah, bug pressure, plenty of it.
Wow! So obviously they were giving the midge a run for its money. By the looks of it. So David and Debra, what were your final impressions as you were leaving the river? What was your overall impression of the actual adventure? I would say your best bits and worst bits, but I think we've covered pretty accurately what the worst bit must have been. So David, first, what was your greatest takeaway from it all?
It was a great journey. It was well recommended. So yeah, it's an excellent journey for. It's nice to do these things that are slightly longer and that have a beginning, middle, and end, and it does have a logic to it. It's also, as we've mentioned 2 or 3 times before, it's also great because it is so well mapped, and that those maps are pretty accurate. They're not. We discovered that they weren't, foolproof, but they're certainly accurate enough, providing you pay attention and you're all on the case with exactly where you are and exactly what It does give you a pretty good sense of what to expect. So I love the journey aspect of it. I love the. If you like, the sort of touched on before, the sort of the similarities and the differences to this country. That was really interesting and exciting for myself, and I also really enjoyed. I think we kind of started to come together as I'm quite interested in group dynamics, and I travel a lot in small groups. Perhaps do a little bit less solo travel than I used to. And it did feel like after we had that little pause, we did sort of start to come together. We started to gel a little bit as a team. And so I really enjoyed that part. And it felt like I think we all commented at the end that we felt like we'd become a bit more confident on the river, or we'd become sort of, you really start to feel after 10 days on the water, you really start to feel at one with the boat and with the river. And as silly as that might sound at times, but if there's a, I forget the name for it, but there's a phenomenon that happens when you're on dry land. If you close your eyes, you can feel yourself rocking. Which any sailors listening will or watching will be familiar with that phenomenon. I forget the name. It has a particular name, but fantastic journey, and I enjoyed the fact that we did it safely. And also kind of we stretched ourselves a little bit in terms of sort of technical whitewater. And we did that in a place that isn't, it would be easy to back off some of the stuff that we did, but we kind of, it felt like we stretched ourselves in the right kind of way. So I really valued it from that point of view, and I'd love to sort of try something like this again.
Fantastic. What about yourself, Deborah?
What could I add to that? I loved the whole journey, I've got to say too. I really did. Even now, the mosquitoes are just a story to talk about, aren't they? It's like living with midges here in Scotland, but those things are bigger. As David said, it's a journey that has that start, middle, and end, and having that enjoyment of the walk-in despite our heavy packs. I loved being up in the country, up in the mountains there, and having those high camps, and then gradually, the landscape changing as you're moving through it, and just trying to make your way through some of the landscape. David mentioned it's easier to actually paddle through the river there than to actually try and walk through the bush beside it. So, the couple of portages we had and things like that, although they were hard work, it was interesting. The break in the middle, I think I agree with David's points there about it was good to sort of have that break in the middle. I think for me too, it was helping prolong the trip a bit, it felt like. So having a couple of nights in a base camp and then having that walk up to the fells was great. It was good to get away from the mosquitoes and the other biting flies and everything else. And just look at the detail, the plants and everything else as well. I mean, I love that aspect of it too. You saw some of the photos I took of the plants up in the Alpine area, but the similarities too with Scotland, the sphagnum mosses and things like that. There's a lot of the colours that you relate to that remind us a lot of, around here near the Cairngorms and things like that too. So,
well, you've certainly got a lovely portfolio of images.
Well organised and
Yeah, as a lovely portfolio of images from the actual trip itself. So rather than sort of go into any detail about gear, because we sort of touched on the previous podcast anyway, is there anything that stood out for you as being the best piece of equipment and the worst piece of equipment? Just very, very briefly, if I can take it in turn, starting with you, Mark.
Oh yeah, that's an easy one for me, because I had a rucksack which literally fell apart as we stepped off the bus at the beginning. So it was hanging by a thread. So yeah, that's an easy one for me. It just about got through to the end, but it ended up in a bin.
And any good piece of equipment, any outstanding piece of equipment that was well worth the journey, taking it with you?
Yeah. I had upgraded my pack raft. I think I talked about it on the previous conversation that we had, Bob. But I have a pack raft with a tie zip, which means that you can store stuff inside the pack raft itself. You've got a waterproof zip that seals it, and then you inflate it. That completely changed it for me, because I didn't have a big rucksack sitting on the front of the boat obscuring my view. It feels a lot safer to be running white water when you've got your stuff stashed inside the boat. So I would recommend it as a safety feature for anyone thinking of a journey like this, is have a boat with a tie zip, so you've got a clear deck so you can see what's coming quickly at you.
Do you mean actually in the tubes or in the spray deck area?
Yeah. So it's at the rear of the boat, and a tie zip is a large waterproof zip. So they use it on dry suits and other sort of nautical equipment. And you pull it open before the boat is inflated. You then can store carefully. So you wrap them up, make sure the weight is distributed evenly across the boat. But the tubes, principally the tubes either side of you where you set your gear, and then you pull up the tie zip and you inflate it, and it remains completely waterproof. So yeah,
Nice.
you're basically running the water with what is called a clean boat, which makes it just much easier.
And yourself, David, best and worst? Is anything briefly that you comes to mind?
I mean, I think like Mark, I mean, it's hard not to get to love your boat. If you know, so I'm very fond of my boat, and it's you know, you kind of you evolve and develop hopefully as a paddler or as a sort of a waterborne journeyer as a result of, you know, your relationship with this thing. So it's hard not to just fall in love with these things, really. Having said that, I think that it's worth mentioning specifically as in terms of the best piece of equipment. I'm not hugely fond of my dry suit. I regard them as a bit of a sort of kind of sweaty things to wear, a bit like waterproof trousers, but even more sort of sweaty and waterproof. But as a safety feature, probably the single most, I mean, perhaps apart from a helmet, the single thing that you can pack that will improve your safety margins by a massive amount. And I've done a D descent in December, in waterproofs without a dry suit, and in the early days, and now look back at that kind of thing and just think that was absolutely insane, with like 2.5 meter wave trains. And had we come out of the boat, that would have been game over. So a dry suit, just you know, and they're expensive items. They're not all that comfortable, you know. They sometimes feel like overkill, but I wouldn't have wanted to do this journey certainly without one. In terms of worst piece of equipment, it was what I didn't take, and that was not through no one. It's certainly not Mark's fault, because as we've said, we didn't have. We had the bug pressure that we weren't expecting, but I took as a result, I took a tarp and a bivy bag. So I had no, there was no break. I would get into my bivy bag and basically zip up the mesh, and that was me and my kind of insect coffin for sort of as long as I could stand it. And then of course I would get out and start the fire. So those last 2 or 3 days were really getting pretty tough. So it was about what I didn't take. And I stupidly didn't even take a head net, you know, kind of. Anyway, so there we are.
Yeah. Yes, a lesson well learned, I'm sure there. And yourself, Deborah, would any 2 items that immediately come to mind?
A bit hard for me because I've had my boat about 3.5 years. So yeah, I've had a lot of good times in that boat and in all sorts of, you know, areas in Scotland. I've taken it to Australia and all sorts of places. So, but I'm constantly amazed at how robust, you know, these good quality pack rafts are. We've talked about how you can pack the gear inside them, keep things out the way, keep your balance right. But one of the new, I guess, slightly newer bits of gear that I've got was my rucksack that I had, which was a custom, if I can mention the name, it's an Atom pack.
Yeah, of course.
Made there in England.
Yeah. Oh, Atom,
So,
yeah, excellent.
I mean, that was brilliant. It probably, I keep wanting them to make slightly bigger ones. I think we've maybe all asked them, but 60 litres the max they do. But the fact I still managed to get everything in or strapped on the pack without everything falling off everywhere. It was so comfortable, and it made a huge difference because I've never carried that much weight before with carrying all the pack raft gear and the safety gear that goes with the, you know, the white water travel on a pack. So yeah, the boat, but yeah, dry suit, definitely agree with you, David. The dry suit as well, having something that's breathable and comfortable, and you know, when you're in it all day and for several days, then that makes a huge difference, particularly when in the colder weather to start with.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for such an epic discussion and conversation about this trip. It sounds very, very memorable on all sorts of levels for all of you. So it sounds like you've all three of you have taken away something unique and particularly rewarding from it. So congratulations on doing it. Is there another one in the pipeline between the three of you? Have you sort of hinted at anything, or you've suggested you might like to do something similar, but you haven't actually suggested a place, or is that under Mark's control?
Well, I've tossed some ideas out on our WhatsApp group. You know, I think I've got a few bites. I've had a few bites. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, I anytime either of them want to join me on a pack rafting trip in northern Scandinavia, I'm there. Just let me know. I've got lots of ideas and places I'd like to travel up there by water.
Well, just make sure you take the mozzie repellent and lots of it by the sound of it, and a tent, David.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks, guys. Have a good evening, and I really appreciate the time you spent. So take care and all the best.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that, folks. And of course, my thanks go to my guests, Mark, David and Debra, for taking the time to share their story. As you can tell, the whole adventure has left a very big impression upon them, and I think they're lining up something equally impressive for their next adventure. Of course, everything we mentioned during the interview is going to be in the show notes, and that can be found over on theoutdoorstation.co.uk, and I'll put a few more links in there that the guys think you might need to know or might like to know if you're interested in starting pack rafting, as there are various places dotted around the UK where you can do it. There's some in Scotland and one in Snowdonia as well. So until next time, folks, stay tuned, because I've got a lot of eclectic content coming soon from a whole variety of sources that's all outdoor related and maybe make you think twice or look at things slightly differently. But it's all part and parcel of the free outdoors entertainment that we provide. So until next time, folks, take care out there, whatever you do, and bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To hear or see more from our extensive free library, please visit theoutdoorstation.co.uk.